Good morning, noon, evening or night, depending when you're watching this video. My name is Legend and welcome to MEP, the Map Enlargement program, the series where I take a look at the smallest maps in World of Tanks and see how they can be sized up to a 1000 by 1000 meter format. We have seen what happened with the Ensk region map, but what kind of process can we form after analyzing the differences between the old, smaller version and the new, bigger version? There are several general steps in the process to apply it towards our upcoming maps. Step number 1, determining new borders. How much area will be added towards the north, south, east or west side? Which side of the map has the best potential to be extended? With Ensk, for example, more area was given towards the east than the west, while the north and south gained a similar area. Step 2. Determine general area themes which correspond with current out-of-bounds areas. What kind of environment, structures and formations can currently be observed outside the map borders? These elements will inspire the newly added areas. The example of Ensk being more city areas on the west and nature areas with a cliff and river or a leaf to the east. Step 3. Restructure relief of the new areas. Flatten out the more rough mountainous grounds and level lower areas up to get rid of extreme reliefs that could hinder the comfort of gameplay. On the Ensk, the hill in the northeast corner has been flattened down quite a lot and the industrial terrain in the south is leveled for the spawn location. Step 4. Restructure large elements within the themed areas. Check if large structures can stay the same or are in need of restructuring for comfortable gameplay. Again, with the industrial area in the south of Ensk, the buildings are lowered in quantity, which created more spacing from each other to have better traverse for tanks. Step 5. Restructure or removal of smaller elements within the themed areas. What small objects, buildings, rubble or destructibles could better be moved or removed? In Ensk, most of the destructible buildings in the west have been removed to steer tanks away from that area and let it become the new light tank scout range, and the water tower has moved towards the middle to avoid giving one team the advantage. Step 6. Add new elements to balance things out. What small objects, buildings, rubble or destructibles could better be added? This time, alongside the middle part of the cliff in Ensk, some buildings were added to function as hard cover to create a small front line on that flank. And step 7, restructure the existing smaller part of the map, making it more suitable in its bigger form. This basically boils down to having onslaught elements being applied with the map. With Ensk, that means that the central plaza and train tracks have been opened up with some train wagons and buildings removed. Now we use these 7 steps and apply them towards another small map and see how it will turn out to be. And for this video, that map will be Lakeville. The surprising map to be added towards this list, being still 800 by 800 meters, it already feels like a quite sizable map. Nevertheless, there's still room to increase its size. And with that, its name is going to be Lakevalley, now with more focus on the added valley instead of the village, which remains untouched. So for the resize plan, being an 800 meters map, we need to add 200 meters which in this case will be 100 meters added in the north and the south and 200 meters towards the west. The village of Lakeville is already quite well rounded with the amount of subflanks. Next to that, there isn't really much more accessible area next to the one additional valley on the horizontal axis towards the train bridge. But such narrow passage on the horizontal axis at the front line didn't seem as an effective addition, unless you would heavily terraform the mountains where the railway enters through tunnels. The other side has more potential in the sense that it can lose some of its mountainous area, since there are way more mountains even further up, which are still going to remain untouched outside the new map borders. For the north and south, they both get equal additions for balance, giving them both interesting backlines. The general areas. Towards the north we got the railway with bridge and tunnels. It forms the backline beyond the northern spawn for the last stands or flanking around. It contains both a small multi-level area with a road and a bridge across and an alternative safer route to cross around the open area towards the village. The northeast are mainly out-of-bound mountains with a tunnel. This area will remain pretty much unchanged, with only a big inaccessible hill with the train tunnel being blocked off. The east side is completely non-applicable, like I said before, no increases in size will be added on here. The southeast will contain an canyon towards the railway bridge with a small road around the mountain. Still a chance here to add a small valley towards the railway bridge, creating a tucked away area for ambushes or last stands. The south will have open areas around small hills, the backline beyond the southern spawn also for the last stands and flanking around. This area has more narrow pathways around the more rocky hills and less open areas than the north, but will have very similar functionality with only certain positioning during the last stands and pushes through being quite the different experience. The southwest is basically a big large hill. The rocky hill remains as much intact to create an additional and safer route around it into the new valley. It creates the highest elevation for the southern base where some advantageous sniping location can be added. The west side of the map will be an elevated pine tree forest between large hills and glacier slides. A second new valley containing several clusters of these pine trees and several avalanche and glacier trenches across the area, and another elevated point where some rocks of the mountain got scattered to create an intensive close range brawl area. And finally in the northwest it will also contain a large hill with another train tunnel. The rocky hill also remains as intact as possible, creating again additional routes towards the new valley with the highest elevation for the northern team, giving them also a couple of advantageous sniping locations. Unfortunately, I couldn't really do much with the train tunnel, so that one will also get blocked off. For the restructuring of relief of the new areas, most of it will lower the ground at the western and southern areas and flatten them around the big rocky mountains. Furthermore, the pine tree area in the new valley will be more equalized with a small elevation change on the horizontal axis going up slightly towards mountains, but having still higher areas at the central west side near the big rocky hill in the middle, and also having higher areas in the northwest and southwest corners. However, the height difference will not be that extreme for the small routes around those hills, and they also need to increase in elevation just slightly to be not too limiting for slower vehicles. Within the pine tree areas of the new valley itself, we'll have several smaller elevation differences, being mainly divided in the highest level with the most trees and foliage, the grass patches between them being a middle level and semi-hulled down positions, and avalanche/glacier slides trenches being the lowest level, creating enough hull down cover against the highest pine tree level. These three level ranges will create interesting play areas when the front line of the elevated middle ground is won by one of the teams, with enough places for the defending team to create more ambushes. Focusing on the larger elements within the themed areas, while the routes around the big rocky hills, mainly at the north and south, will be lowered, those same hills will increase in elevation in order to limit the amount of higher altitude advantageous positions at these flanks. In the south it is easier since the hills nearing the eastern corner are relatively high enough to block off those higher places, but the equivalent positions in the north need to have more barriers between the lower ground in the current map and the higher ground forming the route around, with an additional hill being added west of the railway bridge and the hill at the east of the railway bridge being noticeably increased in height. In the west, each side gets 2 or 3 additional pathways towards the new valley with the pine tree forest, with the glacial slides having eroded the field up to the same level as the current valley inside the map borders. This creates more flanking abilities from and towards the new area instead of making it another fully blocked off flank, with the central hill being the biggest divide between the flanks. So basically every area that is marked with off-limit hatches can neither be traversed nor being able to view above it from any place on the playable area. I can actually see already some potential imbalances that I haven't really took the time to consider, giving the northern spawn some major advantages with a sniper nest with way more overview than the south and more overview from the central brawl area if they have won that towards the south than the southern spawn has, vice versa. But let's just pretend those imbalances don't exist, and if there were a newer update version of the map would be made with those spots being balanced out. So way less smaller elements in the themed area. We got some small restructuring that has to be done with the pine trees to correspond with the slightly changed designated areas. And after testing it, it has to be found how much foliage could potentially be removed in order to avoid invisible tanks with countless of ambush possibilities, avoiding some kind of a Malinovka camp fest with those forest areas. For balance sake, we're also going to add new elements in order to make the passage and potential push through the enemy lines more interesting and less punishing. Next to the glacier slide trenches, there will also be added a few boulders in order to create more solid cover for advancing and defending forces, encouraging players to avoid sniping from behind and waiting for someone to make the first move. There will be a higher concentration of boulders in the central elevated area of the new valley, created a more suitable front line with a ton of corners to potentially peek from, being a rather exciting brawl location, a stark contrast to the current valley with only 3 corners to use compared to the like 20 of the new one. And finally, we're also going to restructure some of the existing parts of the map. Because next to making some space for pathways towards the new valley, there will also be an additional road straight through the middle of the central mountain range, opening up a small road to create a route between the lake and the valley, because the lake alone provides enough of a general barrier between the flanks, and the opening gives more leeway towards the central road that will experience more cover and be somewhat more safe. In addition, at both ends of the road, it will split up, creating more sub-flanks at those front lines, giving more possibilities on the valley side to brawl, as well as creating a new exciting experience for the lake road to be used, which I have seemingly also made in favor of the northern spawn. Again, it could be reworked if it turns out to be a really big problem. And that is the complete map of Lakevalley. Design-wise, it was somewhat harder to, well, fill up with all the certain details, since with Himmelsdorf in the city areas, I already saw the building blocks clearly in order to make the map and subsequent roads, infrastructure, all the additional areas around it complete. And with those nature areas, there's less details to work with, really just adding in as much smaller solid cover as I could comfortably go to without being too much of a change from the existing areas outside of the current map. I know that that is the whole premise, that I can do pretty much anything I want outside the current borders, but my creativity also knows its limits. So I am kind of depending on what I can actually observe, what is already present at those areas outside the current map border. I found it also a bit more complex to design than Himmelsdorf. I really needed to think about how to structure up those newer areas, those vast, like open-ish areas with, yeah, sure, you got the pine trees to create some soft cover with foliage, but other than that, it all seems like open, clear areas. So thinking about all kinds of details, like the glacier slide trenches, was kind of a breakthrough, and luckily I got that inspiration already from slight observations at the current relief of those out of bounds areas, but otherwise it would be quite a bland area, as I didn't know enough how to increase the different levels of relief, of create enough relief to make it very interesting. And the additional changes to the current map was kind of improvising due to the lack of a onslaught map variant and the lack of random events on Lakeville, which don't exist. However, I already knew right away that such an additional pathway throughout the central mountain range would already be a good addition to add towards the current map. But you see, other than that, no additional changes has been made. There are just the additional pathways towards the new areas, but also that isn't given. My whole map design strategy is to create as little isolated flanks or isolated flank areas on those maps. Sure, you've got some areas which, well, takes a while to get around towards. Not everything should be able to be engaged from another corner, just drive like 5 seconds around. But those full cut off flanks with the entire lake or the entire middle mountain range are kind of big areas. A lot of my most hated maps have those big isolated areas, like Empire's Border, perfect example. Those big mountain ranges create such isolating areas that, well, it's really not fun to play that map. But that is everything I can say about Lakevalley. So hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. And I will see you in the next video, where we're going to tackle the map increase of mines, creating a bit of a competition towards mine design versus Wargaming's design. So stay tuned for that. Laters!